we should pick up where we were to some extent. Again, today we're going to work on, we'll go through all the various names, but right now, just some quick of a chazara. We reviewed Yehoshua basically and his distribution of the lands to the Jewish people. The most significant events in Yehoshua, or I'd say just probably the most significant event in terms of affecting the people who were living in Eretz Yisrael at the time, was his conquering of see if we even have it here on the show. We should. Jericho, Yericho, and that pretty much put the fear of God in the residents of the area. But now we start getting to some of the later shoftim. And if anything, we've learned that the shoftim themselves were various degrees of background, or these were not prophets necessarily, although some did speak to malachim, to angels, and some, we don't know, did any that spoke directly to Hashem? Not that I'm aware of. There was no direct prophecy. But, and of various characters. At the time, most of the Jews, not most, but many of the Jews were intermarried, either with the Midyanim or even the Canaanites. And you had basically a people that were not motivated, as it were, following the directions of Hashem, but many of them were tired of war already. It was already 30, 40, 50 years after they came into the land, and therefore ended up being subjected to constant, I wouldn't say attrition, but menacing from a number of the different nations that were surrounding them. To the east, to the west, you had the Mediterranean Sea. So at most, where you were getting your harassment was from Gaza or Gaza, and the area down to the left, which were being held by the Philistines, Philistia. You also had Amalek down at the lower left. You had Edom to the lower right, which were harassing the Jews. You had Moab down at the very bottom right, which is, as you can see, was right by the Yam HaMelach, the Salt Sea, Dead Sea. Ruvain on their side, and Yehuda right across the water. And similarly, you had the Arameans to the top right, which were in the area of Naphtali, and Manasseh right beneath them. And these were the various tribes, nations that were harassing the Jews from all sides. Now, when I say harassing, I don't mean just conquering land, which they did, stealing food, which they did, stealing crops, which they did, but actual attacks that were murdering Jews. And yet they couldn't get themselves together as one united people to do anything about it. And they didn't have leaders at the time that were doing anything. You had individuals, unfortunately, that were only able to stand up, maybe rescue the Jews at the time, but we're not doing anything in terms, otherwise, did not have the leadership potential or spirit or direction to move forward and lead the Jews in any significant way. We are now up to, we talked about the early judges. Osniel ben Kenas was not much known for much of having done anything. Ehud, who had killed the king of the Moabites and therefore got them to spare the Jews for a bit and ended up leading for 80 years. Shamgar, which was just for a little while. Then you had Devorah and Barak being the general, and the heroine of the whole story being Yael, who ended up killing on her own. She was actually the wife of Heber the Kenite, who was a descendant of Yisro, and on her own basically killed Sisera. And we talked about the mother of Sisera and the Navi talking about her waiting for her son, her little baby, to come home with prizes, which basically meant he had killed a lot of Jews and he had subjugated them. And Nebuch, she was at the window crying, waiting for her son. And yet we see that Hashem took even that, the mother of an evil Sisera, and the motherly love, the motherly caring, and her cries at the window as the template that we use for the shofar blowing to this day, to recognize and to call out in that same longing as we daven to Hashem. Now we're up to Gideon. Gideon was, actually, we'll see the area here. Do we have the map on the screen?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
You have here Yabesh Gilad. Some of these areas and names are going to come up a little bit. But basically, he was living in Menashe, which was right here. And Gilad, this is the area that he came from, on the other side of the Jordan. His name was Gideon. He was the son of Joash, an Aviezrite. His brothers had been put to death on Mount Tabor by the Midianites, who we said were over here. And let's see what Tabor was. I can't find it offhand and let people in. I think this is Teves. He alone remained uncorrupted by the influences that were around him. And now he met an angel. The Pasuk tells us he met an angel, tells him that you're going to lead them to victory. He goes, give me a sign. Interesting that somebody getting approached by an angel would say, I need proof from you. But he wants to see some sign. He ran into the house. He came out with meat and unleavened cakes of flour and a pot of broth. The angel wouldn't eat it, but asked him to lay it out on the stone and to pour out the broth. And then he touched the food with the end of his staff. A fire came up from the rock and consumed the meat and the bread. And that was good enough for Gideon, to feel he was in charge. The problem that he had was that the main devotion then, again, was the altar of Baal and the trees of the Asherah, which they used to worship. And he destroyed them. He came in, he see where this is. The pasuk. The members of the people from the Baal, after he had destroyed the altar of the Baal, came out to Joash, who was his father, and they wanted him to hand over Gideon to the people. And Joash basically said, what are you standing here fighting for? Your God is the Baal? Let Baal fight for himself. If he's a god, let him do it. And therefore, they then gave him the name Yerub-Baal, which is basically saying, let Baal fight for him. He needed proof, or he wanted proof. He had 32,000 people that came as his army when he originally called. Hashem told to Gideon, well, first, Gideon wanted proof before again that he was on a mission from God and he should be able to show people. So what he asked for a heavenly sign that was interesting. He put some fleece on the ground and said, if the wool became saturated with the dew, while the earth around it remained dry, he would know that Hashem was with him. And so it happened. The next morning, his request had been fulfilled. But he wanted further proof. So now he asked that the wool be dry and the ground around it should be wet with dew. And so it was. So everybody now recognized Gideon's leadership to fight against the Midianite. He had put together 32,000 people. Malach, or an angel, told them, you don't need so many people. We're going to get rid of them. So now he gave the proclamation, anybody who's afraid to go to war can leave. Of the 32,000 that he had, 22,000 left. So now we still have 10,000 people going against troops of about 150,000. But apparently Hashem still thought it was too many. He then Gideon put the men to a test. He took them all down to a river to drink. And this is a famous little aside in history. Of all the men, he told them all to drink. Only 300 drank the water by bringing the water up to their mouths and drinking that way. The rest of them got down on their knees and lapped the water like dogs, which was part of what they had done when they were worshiping the idols. That was the way you appeared before the idol. He then had 300 men. He kept the 300 men and sent the rest of the 10,000, 9,700 away. So now he's left with 300 men to go into against the Midianites. Gideon snuck into the camp, and one of them heard talking about a dream that he had, and he had a cake of barley bread rolled through the camp of Midian, striking them and destroying the tent completely. His friend said that this is a sign that the Jews are going to win, and basically the word went through the Midianite camp that there were the Jews across. What Gideon did is he took his 300 men and he split them into 3 groups. And for each one, each one had a horn, an empty pitcher, and a torch. They put the torches into the empty pitchers so that the light was hidden and approached the camp. When they came close to the camp and everybody was sleeping already, the night watch had just changed. They all broke the pitchers, revealing the lights and the torches. They then blew the horns and the shofros and came charging in. The din of the trumpets, combined with the people running around with the sudden light and the torches, the Midianites basically scattered without any resistance whatsoever. They then chased them through. They ran away, basically back across the Yarden, and the Jews had won. There was some talks about the tribe of Ephraim, who was upset that they had not been called in enough. You can see Ephraim to help them. Menashe was up on top, there in the center. But Ephraim was upset that they had not been called into this battle. And Gideon avoided trying to see. No, it was just basically the Ephraimites were satisfied. They didn't rebel and they kept moving over there. And that was the story of Gideon. It was the end of the Midianite rule over the Jews. His heroism was appreciated. For the first time in Jewish history, the Jews offered Gideon a crown. He asked them to be a crown over him, with his sons to have the right to succession. But he refused and said Hashem should rule over you, and survived his victories 33 years. It was a peaceful time for the Jews. And again, it was just quiet. After Gideon died, it went to Avimelech, who was the son of a Shechamite woman. So it was his son, Avimelech, but even Gideon had one wife, was a woman from Shechem, and nothing really here. They basically chose the Shechemite. After 3 years of reign, Avimelech lost favor, and they were plotting to get rid of him. Without getting into all the personalities, basically the main story here was Gaal, the leader of the rebels, led his followers out of the city against Avimelech, and the rebels were crushed. He then went, basically, Avimelech, after winning against Shechem, they had made a tower in Shechem where they were hiding to stay away, 1,000 people. He sent up the whole building into flames. But then Avimelech met his death at the hands of a woman. He was going by another one of the towers, and apparently a woman dropped a huge stone which landed on his head, and he wasn't dead, he was crippled. And he was laying there, and he asked his armor bearer to kill him so that the word would not go out that he died at the hands of a woman. And the armor bearer did his job. That was the end of Gideon. Then you have Yiftach. Yiftach was dealing mostly with Ammon, not so much the Midianites, but the Ammonites were troubling him. The main story with Yiftach was that before he went out to war, he made a very crazy and very general vow. He promised publicly that he was going to offer as a korban, as a sacrifice, the first thing that approached him when he came home, imagining that it would be one of the animals on the outside, sheep, lamb, I don't know. The problem was when he came back from the battle, he was greeted by his daughter. And he didn't know what to do. Certainly, he was not going to kill her. But basically, he ended up isolating her in order to fulfill the vow. He kept her alone and put her into a single exile. They say that the women would go out 4 times a year to go and comfort, but the only way he was going to feel that he satisfied his oath was to have his daughter confined to a life of solitude in the mountains and until she died. And then you had, again, Ephraim, which was to the left of the screen. They declared war on Yiftach. They were angry because they had not invited them to join in the attack against Ammon. Yiftach easily defeated them, forcing them to flee hurriedly to the Yarden, to the Jordan. Many of them were caught. A lot of them weren't. And the question was, how do you find them when they're mixed in? And here you have the story, very quick, that they were easily identified by the fact that they could not pronounce Shiboleth. I think it was a name actually of an area over here, but they couldn't pronounce the shin. What they would say was the way they would read Hebrew was Siboleth instead of Shiboleth. So that's how the few that were identified, and then Yiftach ruled over Israel for 6 years. Then you have 3 minor ones, Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon, each of which gets about a pasuk or 2 just to say their name and how long they reigned. Ibzan was Boaz. Do you know the name Boaz? Where do we have the name Boaz?
He married Ruth.
Right. He was in the book of Ruth. He was at the time the leader. Ruth was left the childless widow of Ibzan's cousin, is how she was related to him. Boaz married her and then they became the heads of the family that finally gave birth to King David. Ibzan judged Israel for 7 years. Elon ruled for 10. Abdon ruled for 8 more. And now you had a problem with the Pelishtim. The Pelishtim down over here were making the Jews crazy. And then we have Shimshon from the tribe of Dan. This is where he came from. These were the Pelishtim who were aggravating the Jews. He was born to a gentleman by the name of Manoah. Pasuk tells the story about an angel appeared to her saying that she was barren. She would become the mother of a son who would save the Jews from the hands of the Pelishtim. From his birth, he was to be a Nazir, which basically means he was to abstain from wine, and really they stayed away from anything that were grapes. They did not cut their hair, and they were supposed to avoid tumah. They could not deal with death or dead Jewish bodies, and that was the vow he was to take and to keep for his. He was from his birth dedicated as a Nazirite. No razor would touch him. He had long hair. At an early age, he recognized he was very, very strong. Once he was confronted by a young lion, and without exercising much effort, basically tore it apart from its jaws. He used to do roaming expeditions, basically. Timnah, which was south of where he lived, which was Zorah. So here's Zorah, and here's Timnah. And this is where basically he married let me just find Pelishtim. As he was passing on his way to the wedding, he passed the place where he killed the lion. And this is also a famous story. So he saw there that the bees had made a honeycomb in the lion's carcass. So when he came to the house where the wedding was, he basically, to a young Pelishtim, friends and relatives of his wife, he confronted them and made them a bet. He gave them a puzzle. Out of the eater came forth food, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. And he posed this as a puzzle to them to figure out. If they guessed the meaning, he promised to give to each of them a shirt and a suit of apparel, but if not, they were to give him 30 shirts and 30 suits of apparel. Unable to explain it, they went after Shimshon's wife to get the answer. She kept nudging him, he gave her the answer, and then figured out immediately where they got the answer from, and basically said, if you had not plowed with my heifer, none of you would have found out my riddle. Resolved to pay his debts, he did, but then basically fought them. They have a few other stories about once where he tied torches to the tails of foxes and sent them through the land to destroy their crops. The Pelishtim went after him. People of Yehuda were afraid to deal with him. Shimshon was recognized finally as a shofet, and then he got himself involved with Delilah. Delilah was another Philistine woman. She kept nagging him, and basically, through a series of trickery, she would basically be sleeping with him and suddenly say, the Pelishtim are coming, and he would get up, and they tied him with cords. And then again, she would say, the Pelishtim are coming. He would rip apart the cords and slew many of them. A few times he deceived her with false clues. However, he was too confident, and at one point basically told Delilah the mystery of his power, that it lay in his hair. And no razor had touched from the date of his birth. As long as he was true and faithfully a Nazir, he would remain invincible. This time she felt he was telling her the truth. She went ahead and told the Pelishtim. At one time that he came, they managed to fell upon him, made him a prisoner. They put out his eyes. Well, they cut his hair, obviously. So he had no strength. They put out his eyes and they celebrated. They made a huge, huge, huge celebration. Basically, in the temple of their Avodah Zarah, which one was it? Dagon. And they said there were thousands in the temple with vast numbers of people. 3,000 were on the roof alone of the building, while the inner part of the building was also overflowing. He was taken out of the prison. They were singing and dancing. As they were leading him, they had taken out his eyes, so he was blind at this point. And as they were doing all this, he asked the boy who was leading him by the hand that he needed to stand. And I know how he felt. He needed to stand by the pillar. So the boy led him to two pillars. He was standing between the two pillars. He prayed to Hashem for one last bit of strength, which Hashem gave him. He pulled at the two pillars, pushed, and the whole building collapsed, burying him and the thousands of Pelishtim who were in there. They later took his body out and they buried him properly. Then again, you finally had the end story. The last story in Shoftim was with Micha, who was also from Ephraim. But he told his mother he had stolen some money from her. She gave the silver to somebody who made it into an idol. And they put that in Micha's house, and that became the Avodah Zarah. Again, this was from Dan. So you had over here, this area is where the story of Micha was. They went to see 600 Danites, people from Dan, wanted to take over the explored territory. They passed by the house of Micha, where they seized the Avodah Zarah and persuaded the Levi to accompany to their homes. And instead of ministering to one person, Yonatan, the Levite, would now be priest to an entire tribe. The Danites surprised the people of Laish and conquered the city. They rebuilt it and called it Dan. And they won. And basically, that's where they had the Avodah Zarah of Micha, was by the Shevet of Dan. They said they won, but they had a tremendous spiritual downfall, the false priest, and that basically is the end of Shoftim. Basically, a very unsettled time, an aimless time, I think, is more than anything else. The Jews did not have any purpose at that time. They came in as conquerors, but very quickly got tired of the battle and refused to get rid of the remaining nations around them and on top of them to give them peace. 400 years. A few individual characters that had significant stories of their own, with Nisim or without, but otherwise not a time of any great spiritual conquest, development, or anything like that. V'zehu, that is the Sefer of Shoftim. Can ask questions? I'll ask you a quick one. What was the name that they gave Yiftach after his father chased them away when they wanted to get the Baal? Yerubal, we said it before. Yerubal was the name they gave him. Basically, let Baal take care of himself.
Isaac, can I ask you something?
Anything.
Okay, where on the map you mentioned the Nile River,
Nile, never.
not the Nile.
Nile is by Egypt.
sorry.
That's
Not
all the Jordan.
the Jordan. I'm sorry, the Jordan. That is the Jordan River. Is that correct? Or
Yes.
that? Okay, so where is Jordan in relationship to that river? On the other
Where
side.
is the
Right.
country of Jordan
Correct.
now?
Yes, correct. That's what I'm
To
asking.
the right.
Over here.
This area here that says Gad, Menashe.
Uh-huh.
And
And could you
By
you
the
point
sea
out-
of the Galil. The Galil here.
Message marked for deletion. Saved message.
I'd like to think you care or Absalom. It's Yaakov or Jack. I was Jack way before.
I'm sorry?
Marked for
Wait.
deletion.
can you mute everybody because that
Is
I don't
that
know where,
background noise? Okay,
Yes.
I wasn't sure. I didn't know if he was really speaking to us.
my question is that all of this area was originally Israel and we lost it. This area right there, right?
Okay. The original part of Israel was on this side of the Jordan. To our left was the
Okay.
given land.
Okay.
When the Jews approached Israel and this area and were passing through this area, you had Gad, Reuven, and half of Menashe had huge flocks of sheep. This was a particularly fertile area for
Okay.
grazing.
I see.
So that's when they asked Moshe, can we stay here? And Moshe said, we'll make a deal. If you come with us and you lead us in the battle to conquer the land, then you can come back and stay here. But you have to commit first to helping us conquer the land. And they did. And afterwards, they settled there. So was it the original grant by Hashem? No, but that was the land that we had.
Okay.
This area up north was primarily land that the Jews had as part of the original Yerusha from Hashem. It didn't go down that far. The whole Negev or whatever was never really part. Shimon was the southernmost part of the land, and you can see right by the Dead Sea. So there's quite a bit. Beersheba is to the very bottom of Israel. You already had the Edomites were here. This was all Edom. You had Moab over here. And yes, it chipped away. The Pelishtim chipped away from the left at the land. But this was the core area in which the Jews lived.
I see.
This was called Ever HaYarden, the other side of the Yarden. Ever meaning, again, the other side, which is where we got our name, Ivri, because Abraham was an Ivri. He was on the other side, as it were, intellectually, philosophically, or whatever. So he was also called that. So we never really did conquer and take over all of the promised land. You had these neighboring tribes that were making the Jews crazy from all directions, basically. Now, going up the Jordan here. Now, when Israel was first founded, this area was all part of that land. When the 1947 war hit, Jordan came in and invaded. And that's when they got this chunk over here, this little hole here around Gilgal, maybe even a further north, and coming down from the side, and they ripped this chunk out and became it never really became part of Jordan. They never took the land into their own. They just left it. They didn't want the see. The problem was Jordan itself was an illegal country. Jordan was slapped together at the last minute at the end of World War II. They took the Hashemite king and put him in charge over a couple million Palestinians, as it were, mixed Arabs. They weren't even Palestinians.
Right.
The early references, all the early references to the Palestinians were to the Jews. The Jews were called the Palestinians before 1948. And proudly so. I mean, that was the name of the land. They adopted the name of the land, and that's what they were called. And this is ultimately going to come down when you talk about, Arafat and now what's his name, Abbas, with these crazy things about the Palestinian nation. You take a look, there is no reference anywhere before 1925, I think, maybe even later than that. I would imagine Ezra would probably know the answer better than I would to that. That there was no reference even to Palestine, the Palestinians, as a reference. They were a motley group of Arabs, basically the ones that came in later that became the Palestinians. Arafat came from Egypt. Other people came from Syria, mostly from up north. If anything, the main congregations and where it got mostly filled, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, so whatever, Arabs, came from the areas around, which were basically tribes. Some of them had, plantation of olive trees, maybe. There was no heavy industry there. The place was barren. Now, so another one of the Nisim, you talk about the prophecies of the Shoftim.
Isaac?
Barren the land was until the Jews came back. You couldn't get anything out of these rocks. It was dust and dirt. The Jews came back and all of a sudden it started blossoming like crazy. And the Jews were building, they drained a lot of the swamps, they cleaned it up, and the Arabs came running from all over because the new Palestine that was being built, the Jews coming, meant there was now a work. And hundreds of thousands approached to do the work.
Isaac?
Yes.
I just wanted to clarify a few points. The word Palestine, which seems to be a reference to these Plishtim that I understand were actually invaders from the islands of the Aegean, in fact, who had European DNA, have no connection whatsoever with the existing Arabs there now. And it was really the Romans who, in an effort to de-Judaize Judah, and who were trying to really erase our presence, who named the land Palestine again, and even they named the part of Jordan, and they named Syria Palestina Segunda, Palestina Tertia. In other words, the entire area, which they called as an administrative area for the Roman Empire in an effort to get rid of us. Plus, it was not until 1964 or 5 when Arafat, under the tutelage really of the Soviet Union, started to utilize the term for the PLO. And in fact, he was a Husseini. He was a nephew of the Mufti.
Well, the Mufti was the main mamzer who coordinated with the Nazis. Originally, they took in actually a lot of Nazi not refugees,
Sympathizers,
not just sympathizers, Nazis.
just,
People
just
who were
the real
generals and
deal.
workers. They escaped into the Arab world,
Yeah,
and the Arabs took them in willingly.
yeah,
They both had the same philosophy. They get rid of the Jews. In fact, there was big problems and a big threat to the Jews. If Hitler would have turned left instead of right, we would have had some serious, serious issues in North Africa and Israel. And it was a miracle that he didn't, and that this area was left alone. But he had sympathizers galore over here, just based on the one message of kill the Jews. And it's still today, it's the same basic, and this is where the world is eventually going to have to confront. When you sit down with these guys, they have a very simple message. And Iran keeps saying it very clearly. We're going to wipe the Jews off the map. They got direction, they got focus, they know exactly what they want to do. And like, unfortunately, an old joke, I saw a cartoon where they're sitting at the table and Abbas is saying, you know, we want to kill the Jews, we want them all out of here. And you have the president turning to Netanyahu saying, look, can't you just meet him halfway?
Yeah.
Well, that's the point. They want us to negotiate what? These guys are convinced that they're going to take over the infrastructure when they see these beautiful new light rail, and these are things I haven't seen because I haven't been there in too many years. But when you hear about what they are doing there, the economy taking off, the businesses taking off, the position that they are in now in terms of crypto, cybersecurity, even space, in terms of a lot of the work that nobody, what other country had private people sending a rocket to the moon? Israel got a rocket to the moon. I mean, it crashed over there, but landings are a different question. And we may try to avoid the focus in terms of ducking down and, you know, hoping there isn't too much bad news for us. We are going to play a very significant role in the next decades, no question about it. And I think one of the concerns that I have in terms of which way America is going to be, when you read about the history of America, the way it was founded, the miracles that people don't even realize when you talk about the pilgrims when they came here, the miracle of how they were blown one way instead of the other way. And they ended up at a camp that was filled with food, had teepees. It was an Indian village that they landed at that had stores of food, had not buildings, teepees or whatever, and not a single person, because they had all died in a plague the year before. And they met this one guy, I forget his name, Sachma or something, who spoke English because he had been dealing with other traders that he had met earlier. He's the one who opened the door for them, the first Thanksgiving dinner that they did. And the leaders of the nation, Christian as they were, and even as ignorant as they were, recognized and accepted Hashem as a deity in terms of basic Das Hashem. Fine, whatever corruptions there were from the Catholic Church, it wasn't Catholic, but in terms of Jesus and his involvement and everything that's wrong with that, and it is wrong, it's very wrong. But they accepted that there was a God, Deus Hashem. When you talk about Yiras Hashem, it doesn't necessarily mean fear. It means awareness of. And they were very, very, very aware of God and tried to abide by his principles. There was talk about Hebrew being the language of this new nation. There was talk about they considered themselves like Yitzias Mitzrayim, that they had escaped from Europe where the church or whoever else was harassing them, and they came to a new nation, and they perceived themselves almost as Moses and the chosen people with a new world that they could build away from the corruption, the old world philosophy,
The tyranny.
the tyranny, and also the tyranny of the church and the tyranny of the kings. The whole structure in Europe was one of feudalism. I mean, the nation was born that way until there was a revolution. And the French Revolution was not like ours. It was a very nasty business and was not trying to achieve the same kinds of. America was so unique in what it was trying to be, a nation for everybody that left everybody alone and just get along.
A safe haven for everyone, no matter what.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's why even now I have some issues with what we're doing with the borders. But in terms of a place also of, let's put it this way. I teach this when I do high school classes. I say, if you had to pick a motto for the United States, what motto would you pick for the United States? And I'll give you some choices, because they were saying, you know, what are the ideals upon which America was founded? So I came up with the line, follow the money. And I don't mean the way Elon Omar means it in terms of the Benjamins. Look at your money. I tell this to kids, they flip out. They all reach into their pockets and pull out the pennies, the nickels, the dimes, and the quarters. Each one of them has the three pillars that underlie American democracy, the three slogans, as it were, that represent America. What do you think they are?
In God we trust.
That's one.
E pluribus unum.
E pluribus unum, out of many, one. And the third one is, nobody looks at their change. I'm patient. Somebody has to have a penny laying around someplace, or a nickel, or a dime, or a quarter.
One nation under God.
Where does it say that? What are you reading? You have to read something to me now. The answer is to read something, not to think of something. The mission is to find a nickel, a dime, a quarter, a penny. Problem is, we're doing this all at home. So nobody has money in their pockets. Everybody's sitting in their underwear, you know, learning. So any coin, every single coin in the United States has these
Liberty.
three things. What?
Liberty,
Liberty. Those are the three core values that undergird America. One, liberty. People should be naturally free to do what they want, obviously with exceptions for the community or whatever, but otherwise, unless there's a good reason not to do it, you are free to do it. Liberty is one. Two is e pluribus unum, which means out of many, one. So yes, you have the liberty to do anything you want, but is it helping to bring us all together, or is it acting to divide us? So divisive things or things that get people angry are not included in there. And finally and foremost, in God we trust. Not even in God we believe. In God we trust. We leave it to Hashem to take care of things. If we basically give each other freedom and try to work together towards a common good, then we trust that Hashem will take good care of us. It's an incredible concept. And for the time, in the 1700s, this was unknown. You basically had slaves everywhere. Every country in the world had slavery, blacks included. And the idea that, and this slavery was a major issue at the time of the Declaration of Independence and the War for Independence. Many people wanted in the Constitution to outlaw slavery. The problem was that they had a balance. You had a half a nation that wasn't ready for that. And they had to go through whatever they had to go through to purify themselves and clean it up. But the principles and the ideals, you go to Europe, they look at you like you're crazy. There's no nation anywhere was established with these kinds of ideals in terms of anybody who's here, welcome. The problem that I have, unfortunately, is we have an ancient bracha that was given by Hashem to Abraham, which is, you're going to be a great nation. Those that bless you, I will bless, and those that curse you, I will curse. And until now, the United States has been, you look at it, even its place in history with Israel. I'm not interested in the political structure of the country. I look at it as Eretz Yisrael and Jews. Does this help the Jews or does this not help the Jews? And America has always come through and been there incredibly. Look at the rest of the world. Who do we have in terms of giving some, not that we need it. I'm sure Hashem will take care of us one way or the other. But the point is, they've always been there and America's always been strong. I'm concerned now that if we take the wrong turn and we have too close and too many ways to take that turn, whether it's in the interest of politics, whether it's in the interest of business. I used to be terrified because of oil. That the world's dependence, I don't know if anybody here remembers, back in the 60s, you think about the power that the Arab nations had when they did they stopped the oil and oil prices went crazy, and they controlled the world because you're all depending on them for power. Talk about being in a new world now. I've seen over the 20, 30, I used to be on Wall Street tracking the oil stocks and how important they were. Now they become, I wouldn't say completely insignificant, but very quickly. Now, do I have to thank Biden for that? Who knows? Maybe this old donkey kicked the barrel that knocked over the torch, or was it a cow? It wasn't a barrel. A donkey that started the Chicago fire. Maybe Biden gave the kick to finally get us off oil altogether and into electric. It's just a shame that we discovered oil here before all that happened. Between shale oil and gas and everything else, we had a lot of power. But, who knows? Who knows going forward? But I try in terms of making decisions. It's always been for me, is this good for the Jews or bad for the Jews? And there we go. We are all going to go back and start seeing again these maps of Israel and realizing what's going on. And we're going to be in the news. For good or for bad, we're going to be there. We don't have the choice. Anybody, comments, breathing, invite me for coffee.
Yes,
Are we here? Are we not there?
I feel very fearful with regard to anything that's absolutely mandated. Unfortunately, I know it's not Eretz Israel HaKadosha, but it's somebody in the government there now wants to actually mandate for everyone, including medical exemptions, these vaccinations, which have had very, very bad effects on many, many, many people, up to death and including
No,
death.
I don't buy that. Okay, people get
Well, whether
polio.
you buy it or
vaccinated,
not,
they get-
Robert,
no. They get
that's
measles.
fine,
There are
but not
stop
a
signs
lot
for
of
people.
people are fine. There's a
Well,
That's
lot
one
of
thing,
bogus.
people.
anecdotes
It's a
don't
matter of
count,
freedom of choice.
unfortunately.
Yeah,
Phyllis.
well then, don't infect me.
Nobody's infecting you.
You absolutely are.
infected. You should thank God and your immune system.
Folks, the important thing is this. I have a problem. I look to, again, to the rabbis. That's the one. I mean, I had issues, yes, no, back, forth. They asked Kanievsky. I saw the tape. And he said yes. And they said, yes, you can or you should. And he said, you should. Now, the approach I take with this is basically the same approach I take with Yiddishkeit altogether, which is I can't stand there and debate whether this is real or not while I'm being asked to do something. So therefore, if I'm going to do something, I have to accept 100% that this is right. Whether it is or not, I don't know, I'll never know. But I have to go into it with emunah. And I've gotten to the point where the more sophisticated I've gotten, the more basic I've gotten, which is you want to get sophisticated, play a nice game of Go with somebody. But when it gets to Torah or word of Hashem or which way to follow, I just accept and let that sink in. Because if you're going to argue with it and analyze it by my thinking, by my logic, then you're doing, again, you're trying to form God in your image. What I like, what I accept. Once you put the I in there, it's over. You can't. If you look at Navi, if you look at Chumash, if you look at our philosophy altogether, is Hashem responds when you are all in, recognizing there's nobody else to look to but him. So if you sort of believe in God, okay, I'm going to daven also, but in the meantime, I'm going to check through the next 2 reams of doctors to pick from, then you ain't doing it right. Ultimately, I think, and I'll be happy to see anyone correct me, ultimately, I believe the concept of Judaism is, and we're going to end because I see it's already past my time, so I'll let the clock save me, that Devar Hashem, you accept. Now, through whom and what is, you're getting into details, but the idea of faith and going along with that, you have to be in a position where you're desperate. If you think you still have a way to go, I put it this way, when you don't know which way to turn, that's when you turn up. And then you don't question, you accept whatever comes from that up. You pull yourself out and recognize that what you want, what you care, what you think, what you feel is ultimately irrelevant. And at the same time, it's the most important thing in the world, because what happens to you and what you do comes from within. We keep saying that Hashem says we have free choice. We do. You have free choice in what you want to do. Nobody can tell you what you want to do. But when you really, really, really want to do it, and you really, really, really believe that Hashem is the only one who can do it for you, he comes through. It may not be in the narrow thing that you're asking for. You're asking for the job, and you don't get the job. Doesn't mean that your prayer was unanswered. No prayer is unanswered. It means that you are now going to get steered along a different path. I've been denied jobs in my life. I've gotten jobs in my life, miraculously sometimes. And looking back now, maybe because I have time now to sit around and I don't like watching TV. So I got to do something with my time. I look back, and where Hashem tells Moshe, you cannot see me face to face. What does that mean? You cannot see me face to face and live. You can only see my back. You ever think of what that means? It's nice imagery. Hashem and Moshe standing on the mountain. Hashem says, you can't see me face to face, but you can see my back. All of these things have meaning.
He's too bright.
The meaning is you cannot look ahead and say, I know what God is going to do, or follow that way. You can only see God looking back. When you reflect on things that happened in your life, and you get past the anger and past the upset, and you try to look at it objectively, starting where you are now, and hopefully you're somewhat settled and happy with where you are now, because if you're not going to go through this exercise. But if you can accept and be satisfied with where you are now, then you can take the space to look back, and you'll see where Hashem turned you around, where you were one place or another, and Hashem directed you, jobs that you had, jobs that you didn't, people that you met, who introduced you to this, who introduced you to that, where you ended up with something. You have to find something that's pleasurable in your life. Look back from anything that is pleasurable in your life and go backwards and see where it came from. And you will see miracles. You will see coincidences, 1 in a million, an accident. Use any word you want. But that's where you see Hashem, Me'achorai. I think now, my mother used to joke and say, a lot of kids, get up to their neck like this to be saved. She goes, not you. You were up to here when Hashem saves you as a kid. And I look back now at some of the places, the schools I went to, the places I didn't, my friends, my enemies, when I got beaten up, when I got embarrassed, the things that I tried to do and horribly. You spend time, just sit around with your eyes closed and look back at significant events in your life, and you'll see Hashem. I went way over time. Any other comments, complaints, corrections?
Thank you, Isaac.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. I hope most of you enjoyed it. This is my first time doing something like this, so you'll forgive my amateurness, insecurities, messing up, stage fright, or whatever you want to call it. But thank you. I enjoyed doing it. It was certainly good for me.
I don't think you're insecure. So just to give you a positive reinforcement, okay?
It depends on what. I can make a lot of noise. Doesn't mean inside is solid.